I've worked in Hollywood long enough to know there are two types of people in this town. The ones who get invited, and the ones who do what they're told. I was the second kind. So when my boss said we were going to a private dinner at Ellen's house, I didn't ask questions. I booked the car, kept my head down, and made sure he looked clean. But the second we arrived, something felt wrong. No staff, no music. Every window blacked out. The house was full of people, but no one was speaking. Not even to each other. They weren't guests, they were waiting. And whatever they were waiting for, my boss was terrified of it. If you're into stories that peel back the surface of celebrity life and show what might really be lurking underneath, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happened next. We pulled up to a side gate instead of the main entrance. No one greeted us, just a woman in a pale gray dress standing motionless near the door. She didn't introduce herself or ask for names. She looked my boss in the eye, gave a single nod, and turned without a word. We followed her inside. The moment the door shut behind us, I felt like we'd stepped into something we weren't supposed to see. The house was too quiet, not just lacking noise. It felt like sound itself didn't want to be there. Whatever energy usually existed in places like this. Staff moving around, glasses clinking, someone laughing too loud. It was missing, and the silence wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive, intentional. The lighting came from somewhere overhead, but it was strange, warm and soft, like it was meant to keep everything just dim enough that you couldn't really see the corners of the room. It made the space feel smaller than it was, like the walls were creeping in. I'd seen Ellen's place online before, all sunlight and clean design, but this didn't look anything like the pictures. The furniture was gone. The artwork was gone. The walls were stripped bare, like someone had scrubbed every trace of personality out of the place and left it hollow. There were already people inside, but they weren't talking. They stood apart from each other, perfectly spaced like they were placed that way on purpose. No one sat down. No one made eye contact. Everyone looked like they were waiting for something, but no one seemed to know what. I leaned in to ask my boss what this was, but before I could speak, he shook his head hard. He didn't even look at me. Just that one quick shake, like don't say a word, not here. And then I noticed the mirrors, or more accurately, I noticed they were missing. Every single one. No mirrors in the entryway, none in the halls, not even a reflection in the framed photos that used to hang above Ellen's stairs. I realized then that every reflective surface had either been removed, turned to the wall, or covered in thick black fabric. That was the moment I stopped thinking this was just another rich person's private gathering. Whatever this was, it had rules, and someone had made sure we didn't see ourselves when it began. I never saw the door open. I just looked up and she was there. Oprah. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. But the room changed. Everyone straightened. Some stepped back. A few lowered their heads. No one looked her in the eye. She moved slowly through the space, and people shifted around her without being told. It was like watching trained animals, not out of respect, but instinct. Survival. Ellen followed behind her, maybe 3 steps back. She didn't say anything either, just kept her head down and her hands clasped in front of her like a schoolgirl being led into confession. My boss went still. He adjusted his suit, then dropped his hand like it was shaking. I'd never seen him nervous, not once. But now he looked like he couldn't breathe right. Oprah kept walking, scanning the room one person at a time, not casually, intentionally, like she was taking attendance, checking for flaws. When her eyes hit me, she paused, just a second, but I felt it. Not recognition, just that cold, quiet kind of focus people in power have when they don't care who you are, but want you to know they noticed you. I leaned in to ask my boss what this was, and he shook his head once. That was it. One hard shake. Don't speak. And that's when I noticed the curtain. I was sure it hadn't been there before. A narrow opening in the wall, draped in dark red, barely visible unless you were already looking. But she was heading straight for it. The fabric parted before she even touched it. Someone was waiting behind it. She stepped through, and Ellen followed. A few seconds later, Ellen poked her head back out and said quietly, "We'll begin shortly." People started moving. They weren't going toward food. They weren't talking. They were lining up. We followed the others down a narrow hallway hidden behind the curtain. The walls were dark, and the light came from red bulbs tucked high in the corners. The air was heavier back there. It smelled like iron and burnt herbs, like whatever happened in this part of the house had happened many times before. The hallway opened into a circular room built entirely of stone. No windows. No chairs. Just a large black altar in the center, carved from something rough and matte, like it had been pulled out of the earth instead of built. Etched into the floor beneath it were several overlapping rings, filled with lines and symbols. Not mystical drawings or cartoon pentagrams, but something far more technical. Like it had a function. Like it meant something to the people who stood here. 3 men were already waiting at the edges of the room, dressed in dark robes with featureless white masks. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They just stood, hands clasped, as if they'd been standing like that for hours. Or days. That's when I noticed the others had changed clothes. Everyone upstairs had been in cocktail attire, but down here they were dressed in strict black or white. No jewelry. No makeup. Nothing that showed personality. The division wasn't random. Those in white walked in first and stood closer to the altar. Those in black followed and stayed near the walls. I realized quickly, the ones in white were the ones being evaluated. One by one, they stepped forward. Each placed something on the altar. Objects wrapped in cloth, bundles of old letters, stained family heirlooms, and in one case, a strip of skin laid out like parchment. There were no announcements or explanations, but every movement was rehearsed. There was an order to it. And when the offering was placed, each person lowered their head, some on one knee, others lying flat on the cold stone floor. It wasn't quiet because people were afraid. It was quiet because they believed this mattered. That whoever, or whatever, stood on the other side of this ritual was watching, was waiting. Oprah stood behind the altar dressed in black, her face blank, still, focused. Her hands never moved, her voice never rose, but everything orbited around her. When my boss stepped forward, he pulled an envelope from inside his coat and placed it gently on the stone. Then he lowered himself to one knee. His breathing was steady, like he'd rehearsed it in his head 100 times. From behind one of the masks, a low chime rang out. A signal. Whatever judgment was being made, it had passed. My boss rose, walked back, and joined the line of black, clad witnesses without a word. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about symbolism or tradition. This was a real offering, and someone, somewhere, had accepted it. I thought the worst was over once my boss stepped back from the altar, but the ritual wasn't finished. A few in white still waited, holding their offerings close. Each one looked more nervous than the last. Then one woman stepped forward. Late 30s maybe. Actress. Someone whose name I'd heard whispered in meetings, but never seen in public much. She carried a black box. Small velvet, lined, trembling in her hands. She placed it on the altar, opened it, and inside was a gold necklace with a red gemstone. It didn't seem remarkable, at least not to me. But the moment she laid it down, something in the room changed. It wasn't sound. It was pressure, like the air got tighter. The masked figures didn't move. But Oprah's eyes shifted to the woman. Just her eyes. That's all it took. The woman dropped to her knees fast, head bowed, hands flat on the floor. But it was too late. One of the masked men stepped forward. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just precise. He reached into his robe and pulled out a long black cloth. Folded it once. Then twice. Then tied it around the woman's eyes. No one looked shocked. No one stepped in. Ellen watched from the wall, hands clasped tight to her chest, like she was praying it wasn't her turn. The man turned to Oprah. She nodded, and the woman was led out through a side passage I hadn't noticed before. Carved low into the stone, too small to stand in. She had to crawl. He followed close behind, still holding the cloth. They disappeared into the dark. Oprah remained still, not cold, not cruel, just a present. Unshakable, like she'd done this before. Like it was part of something older than this room. Then Ellen stepped forward, holding a silver bowl. Her eyes stayed down, her voice barely above a whisper as she announced, "The vessel has been rejected." The phrase rippled through the guests. No one responded, but a few of them bowed their heads. Some crossed themselves, not with a cross, but with 2 fingers held downward, like an arrow pointing to the floor. That was the first time I let myself think the word. not just cult. Satanic. They weren't worshiping Oprah. They were following her because she served something worse. The altar wasn't for show. The markings weren't decorative. This wasn't metaphor. This was a structure with hierarchy, punishment, reward. Oprah stood at the top of it, and Ellen was just the host, the caretaker, the woman who kept the place clean for whatever was invited in. They weren't worshiping Oprah. They were following her because she served something worse. The altar wasn't for show. The markings weren't decorative. This wasn't metaphor. This was a structure with hierarchy, punishment, reward. Oprah stood at the top of it, and Ellen was just the host, the caretaker, the woman who kept the place clean for whatever was invited in. I didn't understand all of it that night, but I saw enough to know this wasn't rare. This wasn't a one-off. They do this. They've been doing it. And I don't think I was supposed to see any of it. Not as an outsider. Not without giving something back. There's more I need to explain. A lot more. So if you're still here, do one thing for me: subscribe, like, and share this with someone who still thinks these people are just celebrities. We left the house just before dawn. No one said goodbye. No one spoke at all. The guests filed out in silence, like they just left a funeral. Or something worse. My boss didn't look at me once during the drive. Not when I opened the car door. Not when I asked if he was all right. He just stared straight ahead, blinking too often, like his body was still here, but his mind was somewhere far behind us. He didn't show up to the office the next day, or the day after. His phone went to voicemail. I tried his lawyer, his wife, his assistant's assistant. Nobody knew where he was. Nobody seemed to think it was strange. The following week, I got a package. No sender. Just my name on the label. Inside was his ring, the one I'd seen him give up during the ritual, along with a folded note. No message. Just a word, scrawled in ink that had started to run, witness. I started having dreams. Not chaotic or nightmarish. Just quiet rooms, lit by red bulbs. Concrete floors. A black altar in the center of nothing. Always the same. Always cold. Oprah never spoke, but she was always there. Standing behind it, waiting. And I didn't wake up gasping. I woke up calm. Empty. Like I'd left something in the dream and didn't want to get it back. Then things began to shift in my real life. Small but wrong. My neighbor asked how my trip to Santa Barbara was. I never told her I'd left town. A former client called and thanked me for helping with a deal I never worked on. My name was being pulled into places I hadn't stepped foot in. And then there was the voicemail. No number. Just static at first, then a woman's voice. Low, gentle, unmistakable. You stood in his presence. He saw you. That will never be undone. I started noticing people. In crowds. On sidewalks. They'd glance up too quickly when I passed. Some smiled. Others didn't blink at all. One man mouthed a word I couldn't hear. But I recognized the movement of his lips. Witness. I don't know what they gave that night. I don't even know if what I saw was the full ceremony, or just the introduction. But I do know this. Whatever was summoned into that room, it's not trapped there anymore. I've tried to move on. To rebuild some version of the life I had before that night. On paper, things look normal. Clients still call. Emails still come in. I even got a promotion last month. A new title, more money, no interview. Just a contract waiting in my inbox. But I didn't apply for it. And when I asked who referred me, the recruiter paused like he'd read something off a screen he wasn't supposed to see. Then changed the subject. My old contacts. The ones I used to get drinks with. The ones who used to pull me in on last-minute projects. They've gone quiet. Not rude. Just distant. Cautious. Like I started giving off a signal they'd been trained to avoid. At first I told myself it was just trauma. Just my imagination filling in the gaps of what I couldn't explain. But it wasn't just me. I woke up one morning and found my dog sitting at the edge of the room, staring at me, not barking, not wagging her tail, just staring. I called her name. She didn't move. It took hours for her to eat that day. The vet said she was fine. I've started keeping a notebook. Not a journal, not feelings, just fragments, names I dream about. Symbols I wake up drawing in the margins, phrases I can't trace to anything, but feel familiar. I never remember writing them, but I know I did. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I get this feeling, like someone's waiting for me on the other side. Not to harm me, just to be seen. like I've been marked as the one who's supposed to look when no one else will. The people at the top, the ones with power, real power, they don't need security. They don't need fame. They just need silence. And when that's not enough, they need loyalty. The kind that's proven in rooms with no windows and no clocks, under the eyes of something far older than public image. Ellen hasn't been in the news. She's not posting. But someone is keeping her clean. Someone is maintaining that house, keeping the floor swept, the hallways empty, the altar untouched. I used to think I was just part of the machinery, the background, the help. But now I think maybe that's exactly who they look for. The ones who know how to follow orders, who know when not to speak, the ones who never expect to matter. I don't think Oprah ever saw me as a threat. I don't think she had to. I've stopped asking why I was there that night. What matters more is that I didn't leave the same. And whatever was invited in, whatever watched from behind that curtain, it saw me. It still does. If you made it to the end, thank you. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're warnings. So if you want more, or you know someone who still thinks this world runs on luck and talent alone, like, share and subscribe. Because the deeper we go, the darker it gets. And there's still so much more I haven't told you yet.